Good day, ladies and gentlemen. In this session, we are going to be studying about the key concepts in conflict management or in peace and conflict studies. We want to try and define these key concepts and to find out what these key concepts mean so that we can understand better when we are meeting these or when we are finding these in our literature searches or in our researches. To begin with, let's try and find out what the term conflict means. Conflict is understood from different perspectives. It is also understood from different theoretical backgrounds. So there are various definitions by various authors. But the definition that I have for you today so that we can have an appreciation goes like, conflict is the antagonism between two or more groups of people caused by a pursuit of incompatible goals by different groups. Even at family level, at a micro level, people can have different goals or different ambitions which may result in them not agreeing or in a conflict. And conflict has different dimensions depending on the sources of conflict and on the goals of the conflict. The other critical term to define is conflict settlement. This is the stage when parties are reaching an agreement to settle a political conflict or ending an armed conflict. This was defined in the perspective of political conflict and armed conflict. But as a conflict settlement can be any agreement to end any type of conflict or any form of conflict, be it macro level or at a micro level. That is conflict settlement. Then we have conflict containment. That is trying to arrest a conflict from escalating further or trying to arrest the conflict from causing much damage. That is conflict containment. From the word containment, contain, just trying to contain the conflict such that it doesn't escalate further or it doesn't cause more damage or harm. Then we have conflict management. More like conflict containment, conflict management is any effort by a third party at preventing conflict from getting worse or from causing further damage or from escalating further. That is conflict management. These terms are critical to define because we have to know what we mean. We have to know what we are saying because in layman's terms, these terms can be used interchangeably. But for you and me as practitioners of peace, as students of peace and conflict studies, we must know exactly what these terms mean so that we know exactly what we are saying or implying when we use these terms. Conflict management involves acquiring skills related to conflict resolution, self-awareness about conflict modes, conflict communication skills, and establishing a structure for managing conflicts at different levels. Managing conflicts, establishing structures such that this conflict can be managed or can be prevented. Not necessarily being prevented, but the prevention of further escalation or further damage. That is conflict management. Because if we say preventing conflict, that's another term altogether. That's another dimension altogether, which is conflict resolution. Here I've said conflict resolution implies addressing and transforming the deep-rooted causes of conflict. This is more like conflict prevention. It implies addressing and transforming the deep-rooted causes of conflict. Butler 2009 says conflict resolution is addressing the normative values behind the conflict. That is, you are digging deep into the root causes of the conflict and dealing with those root causes so that conflict will not happen at all or will not recur. That is conflict resolution. But as you will find out from your researches and from your literature, conflict resolution is just an ideal. It is not necessarily practical because conflict will always be with us. Conflict will always occur. So the idea of ending or resolving conflict completely is just an ideal. There are strategies that we think we are going to investigate or interrogate to find out whether they can help us to resolve conflicts at all. But as we are aware, there's no society, there's no community that does not have any form of conflict. Even at family level, conflict always exists. So it's difficult to resolve conflict completely. It's now different from conflict management. We are acknowledging that conflicts happen, and when conflicts are happening, there are strategies and ways that we can use or that we can implement to contain or to manage such conflicts. The other critical term that I'm going to define is conflict transformation. What do we mean by conflict transformation? Conflict transformation represents a deeper level of conflict resolution. Focus on developmental process of the conflict. We are saying focus is placed on the developmental process of the conflict, and it facilitates positive change in relationships, in actors, in communication, and in perceptions, issues, and social organizations. By the developmental process, we are looking at the conflict dynamics, the movement of a conflict from when it is conceived and when it starts to manifest and until the time it de-escalates. That is the movement from violent to constructive expression of conflict. We are trying to turn the conflict from being violent and from being destructive to build it into a more constructive expression. Let's say when there is conflict or when there is conflict manifesting, we study the trends, we study the dynamics, we study the processes and try to find ways of averting the conflict direction, averting the energies or diverting the energies from being destructive or from being harmful to something that is positive. Then we also concentration is also placed on structural reform, and it involves complex and multifaceted interventions. By structural reforms, we are looking at the sources of conflict, the causes of conflicts, and most probably and many a times conflict is based in structural organization, be it in an organization, be it in a family, be it in a nation, or even in the international community. The structures that we have may be a source or may be causing the conflict. So if we identify such structural imbalances that are resulting in conflict, we may direct our efforts and try to resolve conflicts from a structural perspective. Right? The last point on this slide is saying this involves complex and multifaceted interventions. Yes, because it's difficult to deal with conflict without other third parties that will help the conflicting parties to negotiate or to reach a settlement or an agreement. So there are multifaceted interventions, which may include peace education, which may include mediation, which may include negotiations, or such interventions. The other forms of interventions can be interventions by various institutions or organizations, such as intergovernmental organizations, such as non-governmental organizations. Intergovernmental organizations includes organizations like SADC, African Union, United Nations, and other such organizations. These may intervene in any form of conflict to provide ways of resolving such conflicts, to provide funds and to provide strategies or even military power to avert or to transform any type of conflict. But armed conflict is conflicts where parties on all sides resort to direct violence and the use of force, especially when we are talking about war, people using guns, people using weapons. This is armed conflict. Armed conflict ranges from military attacks and an all-out war with untold casualties. These are fatalities, people dying in a war, and suffering of civilian populations. Those are the dangers of armed conflict. Then Now let's look at another critical aspect in conflict management or in peace and security studies, which is conflict analysis and conflict mapping. What do we mean? What is conflict analysis? What is conflict mapping? Conflict analysis is a careful, deliberate and systematic study of the causes and conditions of a conflict. A study of the causes and conditions of a conflict. By analyzing, we know that we will be looking at an aspect or a phenomenon to try to separate its component parts to find out its real nature or its characteristics. So this is the same in conflict analysis. We are looking at any type or any form of conflict by trying to separate its component parts to find the sources and the causes of such conflict. This is a thorough research on a conflict, and to try and to find out what are the conditions of the conflict, what are the conditions being favorable for that conflict to occur or to continue or to escalate. That is conflict analysis. Then the other term that we have is conflict mapping. Conflict analysis is conducted at various levels. Yes, let me say at any levels. At any level, be it micro or at macro level, we may need to analyze the conditions, the causes, the sources, the root causes of that conflict so that we may find suitable or sustainable strategies for managing or for containing or for transforming that conflict. These are the levels. We can talk of conflict at an individual level. We can talk of conflict at a local or community level. We can talk of conflict at a national level. And even at international level, that is international conflict. What is the purpose of conflict analysis and conflict mapping processes? To gain a better understanding of actions and strategies of parties in the conflict. What are the parties in the conflict? What are their goals? What are their aims? What are their actions? What are the strategies that they are using? Let me give an example. For you as police officers, we may talk of mass protests and demonstrations that you deal with from time to time. To understand the dynamics of mass protest, you must analyze the protest, and this is not a one-time event. This may take a whole career, people studying mass protests and demonstrations to try and find the conditions that are being favorable for people to protest, the agents or the actors in those protests, as well as their strategies, as well as their aims, as well as their claims, so that we have a deeper understanding of those issues. Without that deeper understanding, it may be difficult for us to come up with any sustainable solution to such conflicts. Conflict dynamics, these are the stages in which the conflict travels from the point when a conflict is conceived, from the point when there is disagreement and antagonism, from the conflict from the time when the conflict starts to manifest, and when it escalates and de-escalates. All these are conflict dynamics. We may also be interested in the nature of the existing relationships. Relationships are key in studying or in analyzing any type or any form of conflict. Are there deep-rooted, enmity or friendships? Is there trust or distrust or mistrust among the parties who are involved in a conflict? or between the parties who are involved in a conflict? What is the status, what is the state of their relationships? Is there a way of reaching an agreement considering those relationships? Is there a way of penetrating those relationships and trying to amend whatever is the disagreement or antagonism between or among those parties? So relationships are key in understanding or in analyzing conflicts. We may also be interested in the issues. Issues are key involved in the conflict. What are the issues? What are the people concerned about? What is the main source of the conflict? What is the main problem? These are the issues that we are talking about. Problems that are causing that conflict. So, there's need to understand such problems or such issues. The background and history of the conflict, studying or analyzing a conflict from a historical perspective so that we have a deeper understanding of the background behind this conflict. Because people do not just wake up one day and decide to have war and decide to fight. There must be a background. There must be issues surrounding whatever the conflict. Right. What is the current situation in the context of the conflict? Is it the good time to intervene? Or we may need to wait? Is it the good time to implement conflict resolution or conflict management strategies? Or we have to wait until tempers cool down a bit? So you have to know the current situation and the context within which the conflict is happening. You may also need to identify the relevant or the particular groups in the conflict. Who is who? Why are they fighting? You need to know that. Are these people key in the solution strategy, in the solution framework? Can they be involved? Is there a way of reaching out to them? So you need to identify the relevant groups or even individuals involved in a conflict. And you also need to identify the factors and trends that underpin the conflict. Trends, by trends we are referring to a pattern. A pattern. Is this a recurring conflict? Has it happened sometime before? Is it likely that it's going to happen in the future? What are the conditions sustaining that conflict? What were the causes when the conflict happened previously? What could be the causes for the conflict to recur or to happen in the future? All those dynamics need to be analyzed. What were the successes and failures in earlier implemented strategies that were aimed at solving the conflicts or resolving the conflicts? Did the people or did we achieve success? Did we succeed in containing, in transforming, or in managing the conflict? Do we have chances of succeeding now? If not, what is the problem? Right, that was conflict analysis. Now, let's look at this other phenomenal or interesting aspect or concept in peace and security studies. That is conflict mapping. Conflict mapping is used to present a conflict using graphics. After we analyze the conflict, we may need to come up with frameworks, with schemas, schematic diagrams to represent the conflict so that people can easily understand the nature of the conflict or the dynamics of the conflict, the root causes of the conflict and the likely solutions or the likely trends in the future. Conflict mapping places parties' relation to each other and to the problem at hand. It helps also to identify opportunities for intervention. Yes. It helps parties to learn about each other's experiences and perceptions. Because oftentimes people are in a conflict thinking that this other party hates me. Let's take, for example, spouses, husband and wife. You may spend weeks not talking to each other. The husband is thinking, this woman hates me, she doesn't love me anymore. The wife is also thinking the same. Until when intervention comes, probably by your child, especially infants. Child can say funny things. Daddy, you don't love mama. Mama, you don't want to talk to daddy. And all of a sudden you are laughing and you start talking and you find out the issue was a small issue that only needed someone to lead you into talking. Right. Then that is conflict mapping. Now let's look at the forms of conflict. Forms of conflict. Firstly, we have what we call latent conflict. What is latent conflict? That is conflict structure without conflictual attitude or behavior. We are saying this is hidden conflict. The conflict is there, antagonism is there, hatred is there, but on the face of it, nobody can tell that there's conflict. I'll repeat the same example in a family setup, husband and wife, and when you have visitors, you may laugh, you may smile, and try to be hospitable to your visitors. And when they go back, they may not even know that these people were fighting. That is latent conflict. It's not communicated. It's not acted upon. People pretend that everything is normal, but there is hidden antagonism and hatred and disagreement in the background. That is latent conflict. Then we have manifest conflict. Manifest conflict refers to the clash of the parties' interests or behavior expressed in conflict becomes oppressive. When the behavior becomes oppressive, then the conflict is beginning to manifest. Or when people start fighting, fist fighting, or when people declare war upon each other, that is manifest conflict, meaning that the conflict is now on the surface, is now visible. Everyone can tell that these people are not in agreement. That is manifest conflict. Types of violence from Gauteng. This is an author. Gauteng speaks or writes about these types of violence: direct violence, structural violence, and cultural violence. What are these concepts? What do they mean? Direct violence is the killing or murder of populations. When violence is that visible, people shooting each other in a war, people cutting each other's throats with hatchets. That is direct violence. And structural violence is when we experience problems like poverty, injustice, or marginalization. Untold, you may not really know what's causing the misery because it's embedded in the social structure. Inequitable distribution of resources can be a good example. Inequitable distribution of power in a society causes structural violence. It also causes poverty and injustice, that is, social injustice and marginalization of certain groups of populations. That is structural violence. The
causes and sources of the conflict are embedded in the social structure. And when we start having wars, mass demonstrations, and protests, we may not know what's causing these problems. But if you analyze and map the conflict effectively, you may come to understand that these types of conflict, even war, are arising from structural injustices, structural imbalances, structural violence. Then we have cultural violence. Cultural traditions and whatever blinds us to the realities of inequality in society. Every society, every community has its own culture, beliefs, norms, and a system of values. So conflicts may be embedded in these cultural norms, these cultural values, especially the issue of gender violence. For example, it is embedded in the cultural structures, in the cultural beliefs, in the norms and values of certain groups of people. So when you are analyzing or mapping these conflicts, you need to identify such cultural trends, such cultural beliefs and practices and norms and values that are sources or that cause conflict in society.
Right, that was that about types of violence. Now we are going to look at this other critical concept or term that we have to really know and understand by way of definition. That is negotiation. What is negotiation? What does it mean in peace and security studies? It says here negotiation refers to talks between conflicting parties who discuss ideas, information, and options in order to reach a mutually acceptable agreement or settlement. These are the parties negotiating. There is no third party intervention in negotiation. In other forms or types of conflicts, the conflicting parties themselves can identify their problem or can realize their problem and be resolved to solve that problem, and they approach each other that let's talk and come up with a strategy or a settlement or an agreement to end this conflict. The parties themselves come to a round table and they discuss options and they reach a settlement. Usually, if it is in an organization or in a country, the best negotiators, the parties send or they choose the best negotiators on their behalf for the negotiation process. And whenever these negotiators come to a round table, they are trying to present the best interest of the organization or of the community. And when they have a settlement, they agree and they make a binding solution to that conflict without a third party. That is reaching a mutually acceptable agreement. A mutually acceptable agreement only happens when parties are considerate to the concerns of the other party. That is key to negotiation. Then the other concept that we need to talk about is mediation. What is mediation? How does it happen? When and why? And what does it mean? For now, we are concerned with the meaning of mediation in peace and security studies. Here, I said mediation is a voluntary process that involves the intervention of a third party, with the conflicting parties retaining control over the outcome of the process. Now, unlike in negotiation, in mediation we have the involvement of a third party. And the third party can be an individual, A third party can be an intergovernmental organization, an institution. A third party can be a team of players coming to assist the parties in a conflict, to see the possibilities, to see the trends, the patterns, and the realities of the conflict, and to be considerate to the situation and to the concerns of the other party. And when that happens, the parties themselves, they also have power to retain the overall decision or the outcome of the process. That is, the mediator does not act as a dictator to tell what the parties to do, but the mediator only helps the parties to see the possibilities of a solution, of ending the conflict, to see the opportunities, to see the realities of the conflict within the context in which the conflict is happening. Then the conflicting parties themselves, they decide and they agree and they come up to a binding solution to that conflict. That is mediation. And we have another concept that we did not include in this slide, which is arbitration. Arbitration is when we have a third party who looks at all the sides, who looks at the story of party A and the story of party B, and weigh the stories, whatever is being said about the conflict, be the sources, the causes, be whatever background is there to that conflict. The arbitrator then weighs what the parties have provided and comes up with a solution based on rules and regulations, especially in the legal context or in the legal framework. The arbitrator tries to reach a solution informed by existing laws or regulations. That is the process of arbitration. These are the terms that we have decided to discuss in this session. There are more coming in the next session and other sessions that we will have during the semester or during this block. If we have sufficient time during this week, we will also deal with theories to conflict management or theories of peace and security studies. This is the end of the presentation. I thank you.